So, hi guys, Tim and Toby here for the ninth episode 9 of how Germany lost the war, and this one, or this one and the last episode, which will be episode 10. Episode 9 is specifically looking at the last German resistance. You can kind of call them resistance fighters, but the last packs of the German army who were still left in Europe to defend themselves and defend themselves and defend them against the kind of up and coming Russian terror, which would of course be a big terror after the war years after 1945. But yeah, so you're looking at early mid-April 1945. Russia had basically pushed with of course Britain and America with the Allies right out. Are pushing back Germany in Germany, pushing back the German army into Germany themselves, into the Deutschland. And so what Russia comes across are these small little pockets. Now these are pockets of Germans who are basically lost from their own units, or are units in themselves, who are basically hanging on to the last little specks of this country. So specifically we're going to talk about, this is kind of the pocket in general, but this specific is Kurland pocket. And now Kurland, you get the German army the German specs who fought in Kurland, that little pocket, resistance pocket, do get their own title as well, Kurland, which I will splice in a picture at the end. Sadly I don't have one, but I'll splice in a photo of one at the end. So Toby, do you want to just continue the story?
Yes, so in Kurland you had a real mishmash of German divisions. You had the Latvian SS division, which, believe it or not, actually faced off against a Latvian Soviet division, the 130th Rifle Corps, and the 19th SS Panzer Division, Infantry Division rather, which was mostly made up of Latvians. So, this was really vicious stuff, hand-to-hand fighting in bogs, marshes. The Germans really had nothing to lose here. They were fighting for really survival at this stage. And again, that's increased by the fact that it's actually a lot of the time there were Russians against Russians or Latvians or whatever as demonstrated there, because a lot of Russians early in the war had been forced into the German army, and they were still fighting, although a bit kind of more likely to desert. And when the offensive struck, the Germans really were in deep trouble. So they launched the Vigor offensive operation at 10 a.m. on the 15th of October 1944. So only on the 11th, So effectively, the Soviets pushed the Germans back quite a long way, but then the Germans dug in, and there were thousands of casualties on each side. Meanwhile, because this is in kind of that area, the German administration in Germany itself had begun to basically implode. You had the Gauleiters, which were the Nazi Party officials, kind of, overseeing certain regions. They would say, defend this place to the last man, and then they would just flee all the way away. So one of the famous operations to rescue a lot of German civilian refugees who ran in vast columns, literally huge columns, so big they could be very easily seen from the air, which was a problem because the Russians had a very powerful air force by this stage. And they were mistaken as soldiers and then attacked constantly. They had to go across frozen lakes, which was terribly perilous. I've heard accounts of people falling into them, going under the ice and then drowning. And then someone just stood by the side of this makeshift road just crying because they'd lost their entire family. You had... but this was called Operation Hannibal. Operation Hannibal was first initiated by Karl Dönitz, the head of the German Kriegsmarine, or German Navy, and he decided to bring as many military and civilian people back across to Denmark and other places using a motley collection of just really anything that would float. So you had a bunch of boats which were formerly Strength Through Joy cruise liners, and they hadn't been to sea for years, literally since the start of the Second World War, and were being used for accommodation for U-boat officers. Now, these were plundered and loaded full of refugees, and it was very successful. It was very successful. But there was a fair share of disasters, and most notably the Wilhelm Gustov, which was the worst maritime disaster in the history of the world. It was preposterously overloaded with people, and when a Soviet submarine hit it, definitely the vast majority of people on board died. Then you get the hardcore SS fanatics who'd been guarding, camps and all kinds of other unpleasant stuff. Now, some people seem to think they actually marched all of the prisoners in the camps across Germany, and they marched them to these ports. Why? Well, they loaded them all onto a bunch of passenger ships. Now, the ship's captains protested, but it's the SS. He wrote his last will basically saying that if he hadn't have complied with this, he would have just been shot anyway, or hung or something from the nearest lamppost. So what you end up with there is they drove these prisoners onto the ship. Now, some people seem to think that Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, wanted to barter with Sweden using the prisoners and then send the prisoners to Sweden as kind of a goodwill message to the Allies. However, considering the insidious mentality of the Waffen-SS, or just the SS in general, I think there was a likelier reason for this. Basically, when these ships were put to sea, for no apparent reason they lingered in a really big bay where there was a lot of RAF activity. Now, the RAF knew these things were there, and they somehow were fed information saying that they were carrying high-ranking German officers on the escape to continue the battle in Denmark. They were full of prisoners, so typhoons launched rocket attacks, and most of them, well, in fact, all of the ships capsized, and I would say about 90 to 95% of the prisoners on board drowned or froze to death in the sea. So, brutal stuff going on there. As the party began to implode, the Wehrmacht was still holding on for dear life in Kurland. So I'll pass you back to Tim.
Right. Thanks, Toby.
Finale.
So yes, what you got in Kurland was literally just one complete solid trench from, left to right, with Germans packed inside them, and of course you had bayonet fighting, hand-to-hand combat, everything, with the Russians. And after that, it was literally just like the war had just been over for the Germans, because it was either them or their lives type of thing. So they had to hand themselves in. But what you got is kind of, say this is a map, you got Britain, America and Canada coming up from Normandy in that direction towards Germany. Then you got the Russians kind of sweeping in this way through Kurland, all the other pockets, down that way towards. So basically, Berlin was the centre and, was the prime target, and that was it, really. So, and, that was it for Germany. So, do you want to say anything, Toby, just before we end the video?
Yes, so before we end, I've got a couple of items that will be in photos at the end of this. So, as kind of an exhibition of the very much hand-to-hand close combat nature of the fighting, in this video I'm going to add a Panzerfaust 30 Klein. So there were different types of the famous German anti-tank Panzerfaust. First came the 30 Klein, which is the rarest, and that it tended to bounce off a bit. Then came just the 30, which was much more effective, and the 30 is in range. Then came the 60, and then came something very rare, known as the 100, which is basically the same as the 60 with a longer range. This one's the 30 Klein, as I mentioned, and was found in Kurland. Now this one, just to clarify, yes, despite being relic, it's completely inert. I would never be so stupid as to pile into my collection some kind of, effectively, bomb. But it's very interesting, as this one was never actually kind of used, we think. Reason being is that the warhead came in several separate pieces. Now, propellant also came separately, so the propellant isn't in there. But there came, like, the first stage, which was just a tube with a screw on the end. Then went the main warhead. And, again, the firing mechanism is different. It's more of a push button rather than a press down to fire. It still shows you they were using stuff from 1943 all the way into late 44, early 45. And I find it very interesting. There's still a tiny little bit of the paint left, and the sight is actually still folded down, which means it was never flicked up, so it was never used, because these things would just be thrown away once they're used. So, you know, whoever or wherever this was, they were overrun so quickly, they just simply didn't have the chance to use this Panzerfaust against anything. And then the last item I'm going to include is it shows a more personal nature to the fighting. So a lot of my collection is field equipment and personal items. This is very personal. It's a lovely kind of German, you may or may not have seen them in other videos from other YouTubers, I don't know, German aluminium ration tin. So these were pretty much just tin cans that you would open up, and then this one contained meat, I think. What's really nice about this one is it's still rolled, so a lot of them will be flattened out by dealers now because they wanted to look more interesting, I guess, on display, whereas this one's still got that lovely, you know, rolled back of the lid, so you can see where someone's done that. It's really nice to see, you know. The last time someone did that was in 1944 in Kurland. So yeah, I'll hand you back over to Tim for the end of the video.
Right, thanks Toby. So yes, you know, the Germans were basically fleeing in droves, surrendering in droves, and everything by the time we get to May, well, kind of class April and then into May 1945, which the next episode, episode 10, will be just that, the Battle of Berlin, where it all ends for the war in Europe. So I'll see you in the final part, episode 10. So thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one, and hope you enjoyed it.